The night the machine went down, there were 11 engineers standing around it, and not one of them could tell Bertram Voss why. Voss Dynamics occupied a converted warehouse on the outskirts of Austin. The kind of building that looked unremarkable from the outside and housed, on the inside, a prototype fusion containment rig that had cost the company just under $1.1 billion to build over 6 years. It was scheduled for its final validation run at 6 the next morning. With investors from 3 continents flying in to watch, and at 11:40 that night, it simply stopped. No warning. No error cascade the engineers could point to. Just silence where there should have been the low, steady hum of a machine that represented the entire company's future. Bertram Voss stood in the observation gallery above the containment floor, watching his lead engineer. A sharp, exhausted man named Dr. Priyank Oberoi argue quietly with 2 colleagues over a tablet full of diagnostic readouts that told them everything except the one thing they needed to know. "We have 7 hours. Voss said, not loudly, but in the flat tone of a man who had already done the math on what happens to a company when investors watch a billion-dollar machine fail to turn on. "Someone needs to tell me what's wrong with it." Nobody answered him, because nobody knew. It was Renata Alvarez who noticed the sound first, or rather the absence of it. Renata had worked the overnight cleaning shift at Voss Dynamics for 4 years, pushing her cart of supplies through hallways that most of the engineers walked past without ever really seeing her. The particular kind of invisibility that comes with a uniform and a job nobody thinks to ask questions about. She had been mopping the corridor outside the containment floor when the hum stopped, and she noticed it the way a person notices their own heartbeat go quiet. Immediately. And with a kind of dread she couldn't yet explain. She set down her mop and walked to the observation window. One of the junior engineers, a young man named Cole Bramante, who had been at the company 8 months, noticed her standing there and said, not unkindly, but with the reflexive dismissiveness of someone who'd never once considered the janitor might have anything relevant to say, "You should head to the next floor. Ma'am, we're dealing with something." Renata did not move. "The coil sequencer," she said. "It's not the containment field. Listen to it." Cole blinked at her. "I'm sorry?" "The pitch." Before it stopped, the resonance was climbing, not falling. "That's not a containment failure, that's a sequencer desync. I've heard it do that before." Bertram Voss, standing 20 feet away, turned around slowly. He had built Voss Dynamics from a garage lab in 2009 into one of the most closely watched private fusion ventures in the country, and in 17 years of hiring the sharpest engineers money could recruit, he had developed one unshakable habit. He listened when someone said something specific enough to be either brilliant or completely wrong. Because the vague ones were never worth his time and the specific ones sometimes were. "Say that again," Voss said. Renata straightened, aware now that every engineer on the floor had turned to look at her, aware of exactly how it looked. A woman in a cleaning uniform, standing in a control room full of PhDs, telling them their own machine's diagnosis. "I clean this floor 5 nights a week," she said. "I've heard that machine idle, ramp, and shut down 100 times. Tonight it didn't shut down clean. The pitch climbed for about 4 seconds before it cut out. That's the sequencer losing sync with the containment coils, not the coils themselves failing. If you look at the coil temperature logs instead of the field diagnostics, I think you'll see it." Dr. Oberoi, who had spent the last 40 minutes staring at field diagnostics that told him nothing, hesitated only a second before pulling up the coil temperature logs instead. Data his own team hadn't prioritized because standard protocol treated field diagnostics as the primary failure indicator. The coil temperature logs showed exactly what Renata described, a 4-second desync spike immediately preceding shutdown. A signature that matched a known but rare sequencer fault, one buried on page 40 of a maintenance manual that none of the on-site engineers had memorized, because it described a failure mode so uncommon it had only occurred twice in the machine's testing history. "How?" Voss asked. "Quiet now. Do you know that?" Renata was still for a moment, the kind of stillness that comes before someone decides whether to say a thing they've kept to themselves for a long time. Before I cleaned buildings, I was an electrical systems technician for 11 years, she said, at a naval facility in San Diego. I worked on power sequencing for propulsion systems. I know what a desync sounds like before a shutdown, because I used to have to catch it before it became something worse. Cole Bramante, who 30 seconds earlier had told her to head to the next floor, said nothing at all. Why, Voss asked, are you mopping my hallways instead of doing that? Renata's answer was simple and delivered without self-pity, which somehow made it land harder than if she'd said it bitterly. My husband got sick. Long hospital stay, and then a longer recovery. I needed something with steady hours and no travel, and cleaning work was what was available when I needed it fastest. I took it. I'm good at it. But I never stopped understanding machines. Ma'am, sir, I just stopped being asked about them. Voss turned to Dr. Oberoi. Can you fix a sequencer desync in 7 hours? If that's actually the fault. Oberoi said slowly, still staring at the temperature data, yes. It's a recalibration, not a rebuild. Maybe 90 minutes, once we know where to look. And do you know where to look? Oberoi didn't answer right away, which was its own answer. Voss turned back to Renata. Do you? Renata walked to the panel, not asking permission, because at that point permission had become a formality neither of them needed anymore, and pointed to a specific junction in the sequencer array. There, the secondary relay bank. If it's what I think it is, that relay's been drifting out of calibration for weeks and nobody caught it, because the primary diagnostics don't monitor relay drift directly. Oberoi checked. The relay was, in fact, 3% out of calibration, small enough to have gone unnoticed for weeks, large enough to have finally triggered a full desync under tonight's specific load conditions. It took the engineering team, working under Renata's direction, 10 minutes to recalibrate the relay and bring the sequencer back into sync. The machine hummed back to life at 12:14 in the morning, 5 hours and 46 minutes ahead of the scheduled validation run, and the low, steady sound of it filled the containment floor the way it was supposed to. Bertram Voss did not sleep that night. He spent the remaining hours before the investor demonstration reading Renata Alvarez's old service record, which his head of HR pulled at his request, and which confirmed everything she'd said. 11 years as a Navy electrical systems technician, a commendation for identifying a propulsion fault that had prevented a serious shipboard incident in 2011, and an employment gap that lined up exactly with the years she'd described caring for her husband. The validation run went forward that morning without a single complication, and the investors left satisfied, unaware that the machine they'd just watched succeed had nearly failed to exist for them at all 12 hours earlier. Voss offered Renata a position on the engineering team the following week, not an entry-level one, but a senior systems role with a salary that reflected 11 years of Navy experience the company had walked past for 4 years without knowing it employed. Renata accepted, on one condition Voss hadn't expected, that the company review its onboarding process for support staff, because she suspected she wasn't the only person on the janitorial or maintenance teams with a technical background nobody had ever thought to ask about. Voss agreed, and the audit that followed found 2 more employees with relevant, unused expertise sitting quietly inside job titles nobody had looked past. Cole Bramante, months later, would tell people that the night the machine went down was the night he learned the most important lesson of his career, and it had nothing to do with sequencers or relays at all. It was that the person who tells you they know something specific, in a room full of people who assume they know nothing, is worth stopping to hear out. Because sometimes the only thing standing between a company and disaster is whether anyone bothers to listen to the person holding the mop.